Hello, everyone. We're back, and we have the lovely, the glorious Ravi Mistry coming up. He's going to be talking to us about where behavioral science meets data viz.
Wonderful. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to everyone. Let me share my screen. Fantastic. So I'm going to talk to you today about Nudge, where behavioral design meets data viz. I remember when I was in high school, so for those of you that don't know, or perhaps I didn't have this experience, a lot of my lessons had seating plans. So when you went into lesson year, at the start of the year, you're given a seating plan, and typically this was alphabetical order or boy, girl, depending on how your class teacher worked this out. However, I remember year 9 geography, where on the first day of the year, we get in and the teacher says, actually, everyone, you can sit where you want. So obviously you go and sit with your friends. But what's really interesting is what happened afterwards. So you come back the week after, a month later, every single lesson that we had in that classroom, everyone would sit in the exact same place. And the reason for this is because we as human beings are creatures of habit. We'll take the same train every day. We'll walk the same routes that we know, that are tested and tried. And we very rarely deviate from those things that we know, okay? And while this is what we call habit, right? And this is not, it's set in stone to an extent, but it is reprogrammable. And this diagram illustrates that in some sort of way. So a habit is something where you're doing something as a cue in this instance, and then your action is the fact that you're doing it. And in order to train yourself to get over that habit or do something different, you have to follow this process, the cue, action, reward module, where you sort of work towards training yourself and force yourself to do something different. And this is quite difficult. I mean, I'm from the sort of small things that you try to do to change this. For example, I turn off Twitter notifications and badge icons on my phone, so I'm not immediately drawn by this cue and this desire to look at what's happened or check in on this treatment and get distracted. But the reason that we're creatures of habit is really comes down to our DNA and the way that we're made up as human beings. And of course, a lot of who we are comes down to how our brain works. So we have the hindbrain, or the medulla, which is the part of the brain that controls the instinct. This is our primal instinct to think about different things and instinctively change or make a decision based on whatever else. So this comes down to the snap decisions that you make, the impulses that you give into. And also, this is the first impression you get when you're encountered with any given situation. The frontal cortex, on the other hand, is our rational side. And this is the part of the brain which controls our ability to think rationally, to tap into our memory, our experience, and our ability to recall and control our impulses and correct those sorts of things. So this is where the immediate sort of response or relapse you have can be controlled using this part of our brain. This is the part of the brain that we're doing to consciously do this. But really, this comes down to all about how we make choices. All of this comes down to choice theory. And economics is the study of rational choice under scarcity. So we live in a scarce world where there's scarce resources and a finite number of problems and infinite options in front of us. But economics really looks to study that rational choice that we're making, the decision-making process, and then apply that to a multitude of things. So it's a very broad topic, which you've already heard about in a rough sense today. So this is what I studied at university. I studied economics. This is me 4 or 5 years ago now, graduating in sunny Plymouth, looking a lot younger than I do now. But this is what I studied. I studied economics under these rules and figured out and explored all of these different things for 4 years. And really, in my final year, I sort of discovered this action of behavioral science, and it really holds true today. We're currently in the era of behavior, and this idea of behavior and behavioral design and all of these different things that I'll talk about today, this might actually shape how we develop as a race, as it were, right? Because it's so important that we now look at these things and nudging things and changing the way we do things because of the data. So data is driving this behavioral change. Now, going back to economics, old economics, classical economics is wrong-ish, because the study of economics is based on assumptions. And a lot of these assumptions don't really hold true in the real world. So there's a concept of bounded rationality, which basically says that before we make any decision, say for example, whether to buy apples or oranges, we have perfect information in front of us. So we know the type of apple and orange in front of us. We know every single option. We don't have any issues with something called opportunity cost, which is the opportunity cost is the concept of, you'll lose the value lost between the first choice and second choice material. We don't really think like this. So for example, if you're given the choice between something that that looks the same and it's quite new to you, and there's a cheap item and an expensive item, you probably assume somehow that the more expensive item is probably better, or perhaps your own personal style is to actually look at something that's cheaper and go for that option. But really, unless we have the experience, unless we have the knowledge, unless we have perfect information, we can't really rationally make this choice. And as we know, human beings aren't exactly the most rational of people. So as I said, I studied economics for 4 years, and in my final year, I did actually study and look into a lot more about behavioral economics, which is the cross-section between economics and psychology. And my final year project was actually looking at the act of recycling. So you might notice that there's an image of 3 recycling bins. This is actually a nudge, which we'll talk about a bit later in detail, but it's basically giving you, instead of the one black bin choice, a large waste bin to put all of your rubbish into, it's forcing you to decide, what are you recycling? Like, what are you putting in each one? Like, you've got the compost waste on the right hand side, the paper recycling in the middle, and then bottles and plastics on the left hand side in cans. And it's forcing you to decide. And again, you're using color, you're using shape, you're using all these different things to make you make those decisions. In the UK, you also have the concept of some of the wheelie bins that we have over here, that actually make the recycling bin a 3rd times larger. So you have more space to put in your recycling waste than you do your natural waste. There's also coming into this is the fact that all of this behavioral design and behavioral economics and all of this stuff is happening all around us. There's a great book called the Design of Everyday Things, and it talks about things such as, the fact that we sometimes find pull handles on push doors. And the only cue we have to know that it's a push door is the word push. But we look at the handle and we make that choice that this is probably a pull door. This is some of the different concepts he talks about in here. Now, one of my favorite examples of behavioral design is actually the humble urinal. So in a couple of years ago, 5 or 10 years ago, this idea came about from a manufacturer who painted a image of a housefly inside the urinal, which helped men to aim effectively, right? And this works. I can tell you as a man that it's a challenge in front of you, and you typically take it because it's a subtle change which helps you make that decision to not be blasé about your aim of your urine. But that's not what we're here to talk about. We're here to talk about nudges. And a nudge is a small change to create a desired outcome. So a desired outcome or output is defined by, of course, the person creating the nudge concept. So this is something that could be used for good or for evil. And really, it comes down to two questions: the why and the how. So why are you doing something? What's the opportunity? How are you then going to frame it so that you're nudging consumers to make or end users to make the better decision? Here's a couple more examples of small nudges used by marketers. So 9.99 was heralded in the 80s, if anyone's watched Mad Men, as one of the best marketing renovations of all time, because you're taking something that's $10 and making it $9.99, and suddenly it seems cheaper than it actually is, when really the margin lost is like 1 penny or 1 cent. But people don't think like this. We're like I said, we're irrational people by and large. So on top left, we've got 2 political bills that are advertised to the political electorate. One says we're going to raise the taxes, and the other says we're going to improve the schools by raising taxes. And again, framing and context, all of these different things come into play here. And then, of course, on the right-hand side, we've got positive reinforcement versus negative reinforcement. 1 in 1,000 is a winner versus 999 losers in a raffle. And we accept the information we think we deserve. I think we're living in a post-truth world, as I will go on to after this talk. And I'm hoping she touches on a lot of some of the concepts that we mentioned along here. But it's really important that we start to think critically about the information we consume. But still, we will always default to understanding the information and taking the story that we think we deserve, unless as designers, we start to be a bit more responsible and help nudge our users in the right direction. So let's bring it back. So we're here to talk about data visualization. You all didn't tune in for a lecture on economics, so let's bring it back. So the three key topics I'm going to talk about are the little of data viz. I'm going to talk about data and viz literacy and the modes of nudging. Okay. So the first one I'm going to talk about in the little of data viz is something called sorting. So I'm going to hop back out and go into Tableau here. Let's hop across. And this is a proper sort. So now when you immediately look at this, you can see that I've got sales on the left-hand side. It's the trending upwards, and I can put a title in here saying that everything's going great. Now, the astute amongst you, the people who are trained and to look at axes will notice that down here, I have misordered my charts. I have changed the data to say 2016, 2015, 2017, 2018. So it is not in order. But when you intuitively look at a line chart, you assume, perhaps rightly, perhaps wrongly, that it's linear, it's chronological, because this is how we typically look at this chart type. And this is where I'm talking about a bit of viz literacy. Like, we need to think about how educated our users are in understanding chart types, and do we need to give some sort of framing to help people understand this a bit better? And also, as designers, we need to be very careful about any message we portray and the way we design things and whether we can be misleading or not. Okay, so second one, tacit knowledge. I've touched on this quite neatly before. So tacit knowledge is another economic concept, which basically assumes that everyone has a basic level of knowledge of something in any particular thing. In economics, it's typically just common sense is how you refer to what you refer to when you talk about tacit knowledge. But in data viz, we're talking about things like the simple understanding of things like bar charts. You know, we can encode visual length, and immediately you assume people can understand what's going on here. That the consumer segment in this chart is the longest, and Home Office is the shortest. However, we also shouldn't forget that during our educational lives, a lot of us, some of us, maybe not all of us, go through some sort of mathematical geometry classes where we talk about charts. And the charts you usually learn are the typical bar chart, the pie chart, of course, to look at the angles and all of this different things. So pie charts are very easy to understand. And we also look at we also can compare size easily visually, and I've also added in a packed bubbles over here as well. And packed bubbles, again, it might not be like the correct data viz to use, but what we shouldn't forget is the fact that it's easy for a layman who isn't a data viz practitioner to understand. It's very easy to become sanctimonious about the correct chart types, but we've all used bar charts, we've all used pie charts, we've all used bubble charts, we've all used tree maps. And really it comes back to what Kate was talking about earlier, which is the it depends factor. Okay, we can always come back to this as a default, but we shouldn't assume that our consumer, our end user has this tacit knowledge about data visualization. I'm also gonna now hop across, let me just see if I can move this bar, hide it in some way. Maybe it's this one, move it down, there we go. I'm going to talk about little of data viz, and this is really a huge shout out to the other AK in my life, Andy Kirk. Andy Kirk's series, which is called The Little of Data Visualization, is perhaps my favorite series ever. And before I go into that, I'm going to talk about scatter plots because I've written about the fact that people typically understand scatter plots, and there's a rectangular versus square argument here. This is one for people to talk about and come back to perhaps. But The Little of Data Viz Design is a fantastic series, and Andy Kirk does a really great job of curating really good examples of people using nudges, visual nudges, to actually look at integrating graphs and integrating educational points into their charts. So we're talking about axis line fading, connecting data points, little keys, small color charts changes. And let me just hop across, sorry, back into this one. So let's talk about this one as an example. This is number 2, where he's looking at the fact that there's this chart here from New York Times. And there's a couple of things going on here. You've got titles at the top, you've got the number shown here, and then he's highlighted annotations. The annotation layer is bringing in a bit more information. There's color that's bringing all of these things and grouping things together. And I see all of these and I see nudges. I see the nudge towards allowing you to quickly sum up the amount of violence directed to refugees in this area. We see a nudge to show us that the green aspect is creating this, and it's a simple left to right chart to follow. And I see the annotation layer, which is giving us a call to the key areas for our eyes to be drawn to. Another example is one that I consciously used in my World Cup dashboard. These filters are on the top all rely on each other in order to update. Now, in order to nudge my user into clicking through them in a certain order, I've just added a simple 1, 2, 3. And again, as people who like order and like habits, we habitually will start at number 1, unless you're feeling a bit crazy on a Thursday afternoon. But this is how we think. We think left to right. We typically in the West, we think left to right. We think 1, 2, 3. We think ABC. These are the things that are we can possibly assume, but it always comes back to understanding your user base and understanding what people do. I mentioned using color as a legend, and there's a couple of things going on here. I've used color in here as a to look at the 3 charts. I probably shouldn't use it there, but I've also cleaned it up a bit and had the 2 points as reference line on the side here. And finally, this one I'm going to bring in with 2 examples. First of all, this one from Andy Kirk, who's looking at this matrix and showing the color scheme, the way to read it along the top before you then start looking at the main view. And Ben Davis's fantastic Premier League visualization, which has a key on the right-hand side, and it's subtle, it's to one side. And when you can, if you're feeling confused about it, you can pick it up and search for it and it'll pop up. This is how people technically have started to use things like the little icon to indicate that it's interactive viz, or calls to action. I think, and this is another good call to action here by Ben to say that you can use your up down arrow keys to filter through the teams if you highlight one. So if you select one like this, so it's going to refresh because I want Tableau public. Click one here and then use the up down arrow key. If I click on the viz, that's not going to work. Let me just move on from there then. Okay, so how can you do this? What are the different modes of nudging that you can start using yourself in your everyday life? This is a great little thing that my colleague Martin Pohlers in Germany posted on Intel Network. It's a really nice thing that he saw online, and I think it really resonates because this is exactly how we use things. With this scaling really draws us into the middle, then we look at this section underneath, and most people will completely miss the thing at the top because, again, we will always be drawn to the biggest thing on the page and start understanding that straight off the bat, which I thought was quite interesting. But this also pays attention, of course, in dashboard design. The biggest element on your page will be the first thing people look at, understand. I think this is why big ass numbers, bands, are coming to prevalence versus text tables, because you want to know the first immediate things, then you start adding in other layers such as coloring, annotations, etc. Now, what about Tableau Server? So we're the Tableau community. We want to bring this back to Tableau, and how can we nudge people to start using Tableau Server? And my example on here is to use views. So one of the woefully underused features in Tableau Server is the view function, where you can create your own certain views and share them. So say, for example, I'm looking for this cheap side view. I could immediately be taken to the point that I care about, the thing that I want to be nudged to understand and first be drawn to. I want to highlight that immediately. Now, what's great about this is because you can make it public, but also I can make this my default. So now if I go back to this breadcrumb, go back into the view, I'm going to be immediately greeted by this one thing that I care about. And this works for every single dashboard where you've got filters, parameters, highlight action. You can help your users be nudged in the right direction. And again, what's fantastic about this is you can then send it people to be subscribed. One of the things I often tell our customers who do have Tableau Server is to use this to nudge your users into actively using Tableau Server by sending someone a Monday morning email, your execs, your boss, your managers, to say, hey, this is a nudge, like this is the chart we've got there. If you want to find out more, you can click on the image and it'll take you to the Tableau Server for you to interact. And in order to drive that change, to make your organization is truly data-driven, these small steps really start emulating and enforcing those changes. And of course, we can relate this back to the nudge concepts we've learned about today. So The three things I want to leave you with are, first of all, to remember to ask why. The most important thing here is to understand what you're trying to do before you try and nudge. In the area of behavioral design among UX designers, there's the idea of dark UX, which is where you're using all of this information, all these nudges for bad. You know, we've heard about Cambridge Analytica and all these different things that are going in the press where people are using data for not the right moral and ethical reasons. And you need to ask why and figure out whether something you're doing in nudging someone to get a desired output for you is also a desired output for the masses. And then think about the who and the how. So who is this aimed at and how are they going to interact with it? And what is the desired, how are they going to react to it? How will it actually enforce good decision making? There's actually a behavioral insights unit called the Nudge Unit in the UK government. It might have been disbanded now, but one of the things they did was, for example, on the application form for the DVLA, in order to get a driving license, they added in previously you had to opt in to become a blood donor, but in what the DVLA did was they changed that to opt out. So you're now having to negatively reinforce and positively reinforce. Another example of this is McDonald's in China. They changed it around. They changed in, when you go and buy a burger or a meal, they'll ask you if you want to supersize. And they usually this is a very effective marketing tool. People are like, just for 150 you can supersize. But they flipped it. They said, do you want to reduce your meal size? Do you want to reduce the size of your sides? And only 1/3 of people said yes, because again, it's this positive reinforcement versus negative reinforcement. So it's all about thinking about how and educating your users and finding out how they work. And once you've done that, you can learn and start iterating on your visualizations and on your applications or whatever they might be. And learning and iterating from your user base is super important in order to make sure the nudges that you're applying are for the greater good, that they're having the desired output. And also it's helpful to see, when you're doing changes from text table, old school BI reports to new school BI reports, and, trying to make people more visual, you start thinking about these sorts of things, because nudging them in the right direction helps them see and helping you understand what they were gaining from that old report will help you iterate your new report to help show them that they can be nudged in the right direction. And that's all from me, folks. So thank you for listening. I can be found on Twitter and various other things. And any questions, I'm ready to answer.
Great, Ravi. Thank you very much. Doesn't look like there's any QA at the minute. Does anybody have any questions for Ravi? No? Okay, well, great. Thanks a lot, Ravi. We have 7 minutes until one of our co-hosts, Niall Lauser, is speaking, so we'll be back soon.